The U.S. Senate has approved new sanctions on Russia aimed at strengthening support for Ukraine, tightening economic pressure on Moscow. This is Omni View, episode 137. The U.S. Senate approved a sanctions package targeting Russia that was negotiated by the late Senator Lindsey Graham. The measure seeks to increase economic pressure on Moscow while providing additional backing for Ukraine. It now moves forward in the legislative process. The bill reflects ongoing U.S. efforts to use financial tools against Russia amid the conflict in Ukraine. Supporters in Congress view the sanctions as a necessary step to limit Russia's war resources and signal continued commitment to Ukraine's defense. Russian officials have previously described similar measures as illegitimate interference in their affairs. European allies have mixed records of aligning fully with U.S. sanctions, sometimes citing their own energy dependencies. The package includes tariff provisions that could affect trade flows beyond direct Russian targets. AP News reports details on the bill's passage and provisions. The same outlet notes the breaking announcement of Senate action. What happens next? The legislation advances through remaining congressional steps before any presidential action. Shifting now to developments in Asia, Taiwan's president directed a coastal strike exercise as part of the island's yearly military drills. The activity focused on defending against potential amphibious threats. Officials described the drills as routine training to maintain readiness. Taiwan's defense ministry presents the exercises as standard preparation for territorial security. Chinese state media often frame such drills as provocative moves that heighten cross-strait tensions. Regional observers note that the annual schedule has remained consistent regardless of political leadership in Taipei. The drills occur each year on a fixed calendar that does not shift with changes in administration. Reuters on X reports on the drill and presidential involvement. Reuters provides full coverage of the war games. What happens next? The exercises continue on their regular timetable with no indicated changes. Meanwhile, in Europe, Spain announced plans to introduce border checks with Italy following a dispute over migrant arrivals in the Spanish enclave of Ceuta. The move comes as both countries manage flows across the Mediterranean. Officials said the controls would be temporary. Spanish authorities link the decision to increased arrivals they attribute partly to departures from Italy. Italian officials have countered that responsibility for migration management should be shared across the EU rather than handled through bilateral restrictions. EU institutions have encouraged coordinated approaches among member states on external border issues. The controls target land and sea entry points between the two nations. BBC Breaking on X carries the announcement of the controls. BBC supplies background on the Ceuta row. What happens next? The temporary measures take effect at specified entry points, while talks continue at the EU level. In the Middle East, reports indicate both Israel and Hamas remain reluctant to pursue a comprehensive agreement on Gaza, despite earlier statements from U.S. officials. Each side appears to anticipate the other will reject terms. The situation continues without a negotiated pause in fighting. Israeli government statements emphasize security requirements that must be met before any arrangement. Hamas representatives have stressed demands for prisoner releases and reconstruction guarantees. U.S. diplomatic efforts have focused on bridging these positions, though recent developments show limited movement. Neither party has signaled willingness to accept the core concessions outlined in prior proposals. The Economist on X offers analysis of stalled talks. The Economist provides regional context on positions. What happens next? Diplomatic channels stay open but show no immediate breakthrough. A Delaware court directed Verisk Analytics to complete its planned acquisition of AccuLynx in a transaction valued at $2.35 billion. The ruling followed legal challenges to the agreement. The companies must now move toward closing. Corporate filings show the deal aims to expand Verisk's insurance technology offerings. AccuLynx shareholders had raised objections during the review process. The court's decision clears a regulatory hurdle that had delayed the transaction. The order requires Verisk to finalize the purchase under the original terms. Reuters on X supplies court ruling details. Reuters adds transaction background. What happens next? The parties proceed to close the deal under the cleared terms. Researchers produced the highest resolution images to date of the sun's surface using the National Science Foundation's Daniel K. Inouye Solar Telescope in Hawaii. The pictures reveal complex and changing patterns on the star. The data will support further study of solar activity. The telescope team describes the images as advancing understanding of magnetic fields and energy release on the sun. Other solar observatories have contributed lower resolution data in prior years. The new views may help refine models used for space weather forecasting. The facility sits on the island of Maui and operates under the National Science Foundation. AP on X carries the release of the images. AP notes telescope capabilities. What happens next? The data enters analysis for updated solar models. Now, some progress worth knowing about. Switch, a data center operator, submitted confidential paperwork for an initial public offering in the United States. The filing follows increased demand for computing infrastructure. Bloomberg News first reported the move. Company statements indicate the listing would provide capital for expansion amid rising needs from cloud and artificial intelligence services. Market analysts have noted similar filings by infrastructure firms in recent months. Regulatory review will determine the timing and scale of any public sale. The confidential process allows the firm to gauge investor interest before full disclosure. Reuters on X reports the IPO filing. Reuters supplies market context. What happens next? Regulators review the materials and the company prepares for potential public sale. Now, to really understand this story, most coverage treats sanctions bills as simple executive tools. Yet the process requires specific congressional steps that shape their final form. A bill typically begins with negotiations among senators and House members, often incorporating input from committees that review economic and foreign policy impacts. Once passed by both chambers, it goes to the president for signature, after which the Treasury Department implements the detailed restrictions through regulations. Historical examples show that sanctions packages have sometimes been adjusted during debate to address concerns from industries facing secondary effects. Knowing this sequence helps readers assess whether a reported measure is still subject to change or already locked into law. When reports mention swift passage, check the bill text for carve-outs or delayed effective dates that may limit immediate reach. The Senate version often sets the initial scope before House review adds or removes provisions. Treasury officials then translate broad statutory language into enforceable rules that target specific entities and transactions. This layered approach means the practical impact can differ from the headline description of the legislation. Cross-reference official congressional records with reporting from multiple outlets to separate announced intentions from enacted rules. Primary documents such as bill texts and court filings provide the clearest details on scope and timing. If you want to go deeper on the sanctions package, compare how AP News and AP on X are covering today's lead story. Tomorrow, watch for any further movement on the sanctions bill as it advances in the House. That's Omni View. The news can feel heavy, but understanding what's actually happening and what's being done about it beats doom scrolling every time. Stay curious. Pick one story from today and read it from a second outlet you don't usually open. If balanced perspectives are valuable to you, share this with a friend and subscribe wherever you listen. See you tomorrow. And if you'd rather watch than listen, find us on YouTube at Nera Network. Links in the show notes. One more thing. If you liked today's episode, our sister show Fascinating Frontiers is worth a spot in your feed. The most fascinating news from space and science. It's one of the Nera Network's daily briefings, all free at neranetwork.com. The Do Positive Pod is the club for people who do something about it. Episodes and the dispatch wall at neranetwork.com, the DP Pod. This episode used AI voice synthesis of my voice. Editorial selection and analysis are my own.